I've been building this program so I can create and transform shapes, so I can understand how this works. And I've mostly been reading from this book on fractals, but I've also looked at Khan Academy for different explanations of these transformations. And I've used a couple different techniques to transform shapes, but first we create a shape by defining the corners, the vertices. Here I'm creating 4 shapes, just 4 squares. And then these shapes are my own class. And there are different methods that display the shape. Here's when I was messing around with, I learned a formula for rotating and scaling, and that was in a different fractal book, and that one's called Fractal Vision. But here we give this what they called IFS codes, or I think IFS, but there are these P, Q, R, and S, and then we solve for A, B, C, and D by inputting these, and this gives us finally this formula where the next x, the new transformed x, will be A times the current vertices x plus B times the current vertices vertex y. And then we do the same thing for y, but with C and D. And we're using this trigonometry stuff, calculating based on the cosine and sine. So that's not what this example is about, though. This way I keep reverting back to thinking of shapes in terms of like velocity, magnitude, and position. So, or magnitude and position. Not I think velocity and magnitude are the same thing. So here I calculate, this is for shrinking a shape. I send in an origin. I say this is where I'm shrinking the shape from. This is the point, because ultimately I'm just reducing the magnitude. I'm calculating the velocity or the distance between these points. So if there were a vector to describe how to hit a ball from here to there, then that is what I'm calculating. And then so that's right here, I get the velocity, and then I want to reduce the velocity a little bit so that I can reduce the shape. And then I set the magnitude. And then here I take the current velocity by getting the magnitude, and then I multiply it by this small number. And then I apply that to the current corner that we're looking at in this for loop, and I subtract the velocity from that so that it'll move it on in. And I do a similar thing, not really, but in this rotation of this example, I use a different kind of rotation than the method I described in the beginning. Here I go through each of the vertices, and I copy the vertices, or the individual vertex, so that I don't end up moving it when I don't want to. I can calculate it in here without worrying about messing things up, because sometimes I do that. But here I get the actual vertex, the x coordinate, and I apply this formula I learned from the first fractal book I mentioned. And here we take the P is the origin vector, the vector that we want to rotate from, the point we want to rotate from, and then we minus, or we subtract the vector or the vertex we're currently looking at, and multiply that by the cosine of theta, the amount we want to rotate, and subtract. So that's the formula. And it produces this, which is quite beautiful. And all throughout this quarter, my goal has been to understand how, I guess, the Cartesian algebra stuff can work. How can I make art with programming? And I feel like I've come a long way. I know how to transform things in my mind better, and I have so much more stuff in my palette, I guess, more options. Simple transformations on shapes are creating really beautiful things, but I'm not even done here yet. The reason I'm building this program is so that I can create this example I found in a book called a Pythagoras tree. And all it is a square starts off, and then it rotates from this corner 45, and it rotates from this corner 45, and they meet, and then it rotates again off of there. Oh, and it reduces. It scales down, and it continues to do this, and it ends up making all these spirals. Here I'm making some spirals, but they aren't related the same, and I'm gonna finish this out and create a recursive program or a recursive function that calls itself each time it transforms. It'll call itself twice from each of its top corners, rotate and reduce, and then call itself again twice, and then keep doing this for a number of times. I'll put some sort of limit on, maybe a counter, or maybe I'll say do this until you go out of the screen. But this is what I'm thinking about right now, and this is what I just made.